back to Fireside Chats with Leaders and Innovators. This is part 2 of my conversation with President Paula Johnson, the 14th President of Wellesley College. I hope you enjoy, and without further ado, let's get back into the conversation.
I think having someone who cares about women and understands women's health and women's issues is very important. And having someone who, believes women and what women go through in their everyday lives is also very, very meaningful to me, as I deal with polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so one of the many things is, how can we ensure that the people who are responsible for policies that, help us in our lives, how can we ensure that those people also have care for us? And so having you, be one of the people so involved with all of this policy work and action in women's issues really means a lot to me personally.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have had a lot of experiences and a lot of challenges with my healthcare, and not only as a woman of color, but also, dealing with various health issues. And so knowing that there are, individuals like you who are looking out for us, it really is really wonderful.
Well, thank you. And, thank you for sharing too about your polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it's one of the areas where we do need more research. We need more research to understand, we know the signs and symptoms, but we do need more research to understand that whole spectrum of the disorder.
And I think the start is having a conversation. And so I really appreciate, that conversations are happening and awareness is increasing about it. And so speaking of women's issues, I would love to get into some of the women's rights and social issues, even outside of Wellesley. So a question I love to ask all of my guest speakers is, what does feminism mean to you?
That's a big question. And I think, I'd probably sum it up by just saying that in my mind, feminism is really the right and ability for women to determine their futures and to have the freedom to determine their futures, whatever those may be, and to live in a society where they can bring together those tools and resources to actualize their goals for themselves. So, I think that's a big and lofty goal, but essentially I think that has been what the focus has been, and it's taken different forms over time, whether it was the right to vote, in the early part of the last century, all the way to any number of issues and the different women's movements. But the work continues, and the work continues both here in the United States, but also globally. So, it's an ongoing, as I think it's an ongoing journey.
It certainly is a big question, but I love asking it because every speaker that I've spoken to has a different way of defining it to your own personal experiences. And it's like what you had said previously, who you are influences what you see. Right. And so I love asking this question. Thank you for sharing your answer with me.
Let me ask you, I mean, you have, the podcast is, or you have your organization, We Think Feminist. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about what motivated you.
So I grew up in Texas. I was born and raised there. And so I love being from Texas. I think it's a wonderful state, but obviously it's tumultuous in a lot of ways with policy and current issues that are happening in Texas. And so when I was in high school, I thought, how funny is it that my high school does not have a feminist club? Because feminism just seemed like such a plainly obvious thing to have. But so I started We Think Feminist. I wrote to the district and I said, I'd love to start this club. I want to call it We Think Feminist for that abbreviation, WTF. And Plano Independent School District wrote back to me and they said, you can start the club, but you cannot use WTF anywhere.
I would agree with that.
And so I started the club,
Yeah.
and it was just a way for me to, just share experiences with my fellow students, my peers, who have also experienced, various forms of gender inequality in their academic settings, or where they volunteer, or, just their daily lives. And so it became a place of support. It built a community in my high school. And from there, I said, I would love to start a series of conversations with various leaders in our communities who have kind of used their accomplishments to uplift other women and to help fix that gap. And so we started inviting guest speakers for panels to our school, and then the pandemic hit. And so during the pandemic, I really wanted to continue this series because I had students from the club reaching out to me saying, we have nothing to do. We would love to see more of these guest speakers. Can you make this happen? And so Zoom was new to me, but I got on Zoom and I figured out how to do all of the recording and everything. And I started with my very first speaker, who was the CEO of Genesis Women's Shelter, which is an amazing domestic abuse shelter in Dallas. Jan Langbine, she was my first guest speaker. That was a very, very impactful conversation for me because we touched on a range of issues, but I also found that I loved speaking with someone and in a conversational format. That carries such a different energy in the room when you have just like you're speaking every day to someone. So I decided I'm going to make this a series, and that's where the series Fireside Chats with Leaders and Innovators started. And I've continued it. I've had a couple in-person conversations after that, but you would be my first official in-person conversation. So thank you for being
I'm
here.
Honored. Thank you.
I'm honored to have you. It really is so special to me. And speaking of, having conversations and having, these voices out there, voices like yours, I also want to talk about how Wellesley has a very strong history of having women in high places of elected office who've put their voices out there. And so I'm, of course, thinking of Madeleine Albright and Hillary Rodham Clinton, but also women like Jocelyn Benson and Michelle Au. So why is it important to you to have educated women in elected office?
We are 50% of the population, and it's important, as you've so well put from my prior statements, who you are influences what you see. And to me, that's the biggest reason why you need a true diversity of voices at our legislative tables, at our policy-making tables. It's because we are a country of so many different populations. We need that representation. And having women's voices, women of all types, is so critically important. And we've seen the impact. We've seen the impact of having women's voices at the table. So Wellesley women have a deep history of public service, and this way you've named a few. When I came to Wellesley, we had 7 alumni in the Massachusetts State House.
Wow.
And think about our size.
Yeah.
And we had 7.
Wow.
It just goes to show you, and having 7, it does make a difference. It makes a difference about what you are thinking about, what you see, how you understand your population. Just like it's also important to have men who can see, and listen. But we can't be a monolith. We really have to have those voices. And we continue to do amazingly well as we think about people, even if they don't remain in elected office. But I think people from different perspectives. So when I think about Michelle Au, Dr. Michelle Au, she's an emergency room physician. She brings perspectives, and an Asian woman. So she brings a perspective of all of that history into how she's thinking about her constituency, what are the issues, and how she's learning from not only her peers, but from her community, and bringing that into the policy arena. So much, I just think it's very exciting that we continue to produce these amazing leaders.
It is really exciting, and I am really honored to, be graduating from an institution like this, which encourages leaders. And so I also would like to ask you, what initiatives are you cultivating among students to build upon this tradition?
We've already talked about the Clinton Center. I think there are so many different, they may not be special initiatives, but it's more about the work we do every day. So there are very special initiatives like the Clinton Center, which I do hope touches every student. There's the Albright Institute. But then there's just the way that our college government is organized, the way that our residence halls are organized. Those are opportunities for significant leadership in our students. And I don't mean leadership just in name only, because there are a lot of clubs, and those are organizations where there's a governing body with real responsibility. You do, if you're good, have to listen to the students. You have to represent all of our students, and I think our college government, this administration, has done a terrific job. The opportunity to lead in our residence halls, the way that we have our house presidents, our resident assistants, those are very important opportunities to work and lead the student body. We work with them around a number of different types of trainings. Constructive dialogue is one of the newer ones. How do we help our students gain the skills to talk across difference in the residence halls? It's such an important part of our education. The residence halls are one of the few places on our campus where students they get to choose their roommates, but they don't get to choose who's on their floor. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of it, that there's this diversity of voices and students, that the learning from each other is an important part of what we do. And those student leaders play such an important role in that. How we work with our leaders of our, the various leadership on our sports teams. Mm-hmm. So these are all very well thought out. We don't control them, but we do a lot of deep thinking with our student life partners around what are these spaces and places where students can really rise, have the skills, and work with their peers. And I think that, to me, is just a great preparation for life.
I love that you support students. You give students the toolbox, the motivation to be involved with their community and to talk across difference, but you also just support them and you allow students to uplift each other. And I think that is really something we can all learn from. I absolutely admire that Wellesley does that, because these are brilliant students that are my peers. I'm so lucky to be among them. But I also, I think that having students who can control the narrative and who can, find commonalities amongst differences is an important life skill once we are past Wellesley. And so building these skills, being supported for these skills while we are at Wellesley, allows us to go forward in our careers and wherever life takes us, knowing that we can foster dialogue and knowing that we can, be leaders not only in big formats, but also small formats. And so I really, I think that you have really touched on so many amazing topics today, from your role as a physician researcher to being president of Wellesley, and also talking across difference. I would love to finish with a fun question. Mm-hmm. I would like to ask you, what are your top 3 musical artists of all time, if you had to choose?
Oh my goodness, my top 3 musical artists of all time. Well, I think, it depends on how far back you want to go. But when I think about people who have impacted the way we hear and see, I think we have to include classical music. So I would say one of my favorite composers and music that I think is really extraordinary is Mozart. Mm-hmm. If I were to think about an artist who has made a tremendous difference in the way that the world sees artists, and whose music is absolutely stunning and who stood by his convictions, is Paul Robeson. And coming to more recent times, I'm not going to give you more popular artists, which is probably what you want, but I'm not going to do that because I think that's a much harder question. I think I can answer this much more through the lens of understanding the impact they've made. And if I were to think about a genre where blacks were not really seen and women, I'm going to end with a woman, and that's Jessie Norman, who only recently passed away, I think a couple of years ago. But she really changed the world of opera. So I would put those three, but when I think about, artists that have really been impactful, I think about who they've reached, the minds and hearts that they've changed, and how they've enabled us to see the world differently. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of my criteria.
Well, you certainly took a very fun question and turned it into something much more meaningful. I thank you for that.
Well, it's my pleasure.
You made the question so much better than what it originally was. I certainly will look into, those artists. I, of course, love Mozart, but I will definitely look into Jessie Norman and Paul Robeson. And I think it's just so nice to hear, what you like to listen to on a daily basis. And on that note, thank you so much, President Johnson, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this work. It's important work. Thank you for deciding to transfer to Wellesley. You have really made our community better. And thank you for the work that you are deeply engaged in a way that is really bridging differences. And I think, you are the model. A model of what we really hope for all of our students. So I can't wait to see your trajectory over your life, and I do hope you stay close to Wellesley.
Wow, I cannot thank you enough for your kind words. Thank you so much. This has truly been such an honor.
It has been my honor.
Oh, thank you so much. I really love this.
Take care.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sure President Johnson's words will inspire many out there. And thank you so much to those of you watching. Don't forget to post your comments below and subscribe to our We Think Feminist YouTube channel.